I've been a journalist all my working life. At that stage I was resident in Perth and with a wife and 2 small boys. They decided to up sticks and move to New Zealand, which left me with a lot of clear air and nothing very much to do. And a friend of mine was in the Army Reserve and said, "You're an active outdoor kind of guy, would you like to come along and try joining the Army Reserve?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So I presented myself at Karrakatta Barracks and said, "Hello, here I am, I'm available. I think I might be most useful as a journalist in the Intelligence Corps." They made me a combat engineer, a sapper. Clearly there's not much need for an intelligence person in Perth. There's not a lot of military units there apart from SAS and my engineer regiment. So I ended up as an engineer, and I learnt explosives and bridge building and character building. Had a good time digging an awful lot of holes and filling them in again and digging more holes. And I spent a bit more than 10 years there, and then it came time for me to move to Sydney to pursue my career in news gathering and television. My first recruit camp was March of 1980. It was a benign period, there was no conflict, and not that it bothered me all that much. During the Vietnam period my name came out of the barrel and I passed first medical, and the only thing short of my going in was getting a haircut and a uniform, and I had a mild accident with my motorcycle. I managed to run it into the chain of a revolving wheel and went round into the back sprocket and took half a centimetre off my thumb. So I went back to the medic and he said, "Oh, it's still wrapped up." So he goes, "Poke, poke, poke, poke." Gee whiz, that hurt. So he said, "Well, okay, you can't fire a rifle, go away, we don't want you." So I had 10 years enjoyable time as a sapper, and ultimately Army became aware of my professional skills as a journalist and said, "We would like you to help our senior officers with their media relations and communications." I was happy to do that, except that it's a bit daunting for a general or an admiral to take professional advice from a sapper, the lowest of the low. So they direct entered me as an officer. I did all my obligatory courses, including Staff College, and they made me ultimately a major. And thereafter I spent time tootling from one headquarters to another, doing major exercises like Talisman Sabre, Hamel, I served for our Governor, David Hurley, in 3 different postings. I also had a national or an international commander in the form of a British cavalry colonel, a most interesting man, 6'6" or thereabouts, very imposing manner, glinty eyes. I sat him down for a television interview once and the local said, "The insurgents in the north end of town, sir, are saying that you shouldn't come there." And he said, "I will take my men wherever I like, whenever I like." I tapped him on the shoulder. "Sir, that's a bit direct, a bit confronting. Would you like to reword that?" And he did. The Muthanna Task Group was part of the coalition of the willing, contributed by John Howard to one of the Bushes, I think, one of the President Bushes. It was conceived and operated as an overwatch group for a Japanese engineer battalion, and they were there to rebuild and build new infrastructure, power plants, health centres. We had a smaller job building a bridge in the middle of the nearest provincial capital, which is Al Samoa. The main bridge there is a pontoon bridge, and whenever the snow melted in Turkey and the flood came down, the pontoon boats washed away. So we ultimately built a permanent bridge there. So it was a peacekeeping, although we spent quite a bit of time under armour. There's a rotation of public affairs officer in Muthanna. I was the second one there, but I was there for 2 rotations. So I was asked, and I said, "Yeah, it's what you trained for as a soldier, to go on a deployment and employ your professional skills to do what you're required to do." So I deployed along with 2 Cav, and then with 5-7 RAR. They're both mechanised infantry units, And I was predominantly an advisor to my commanding officer. I've done 2 rotations, they were both lieutenant colonels, and technically responsible to Army headquarters and then pretty directly to the Minister for Defence, and advising both Baghdad and Canberra on events that were going on and responding to local media. It wasn't totally benign. The local media came to me at one stage and said the insurgents who lived in the north end of that particular provincial capital didn't like the way these are the local journalists, didn't like the way that they were reporting things, and live rounds had been left on their doorsteps on a couple of occasions as a warning. A lot of time spent in the camp because a lot of the activities are in the camp. You prepare what we call hometowners. Find a soldier, male or female, on any kind of role, and inquire where they came from, and identify whether there's a local newspaper in their town, and then take some photographs of whatever this person was doing, whether he was a cook or a driver of an armoured vehicle or whatever, craft a story, and it issued back through Canberra to issue to the local newspaper. Hometowners, very popular, pretty mundane, but that was largely the way Iraq was reported from Camp Smitty, the big square compound that I lived in. Strategic and tactical level stuff came out of Canberra, and that was controlled by Army headquarters or Minister for Defence's office according to their needs at the time. And you say that Australia wasn't told much about it, and I say that's quite true. We were not given the task of doing that. There was a long ongoing debate about the role of public affairs officers on deployment as to whether they are doing that kind of ordinary suburban reporting or whether they should be contributing to the communications push or creating a strategic environment by saying the sort of things that you might say, well, we're doing well, nobody's hurt, you don't report rocketings. So, yeah, well, mind you, it was a pretty benign kind of area. We, as I said, the training team came under fire a couple of times only, responded with fire, and nothing further transpired. So, as I say, one of the commanders had told the insurgents or the local sheikhs that you be quiet and we'll be quiet. We'll all go home happy at the end in one piece. The outings, well, I was blessed to be outside the wire quite a lot because the task of rebuilding that we were overwatching involved establishing the provincial government in this town. We were there for one of their early elections, the purple fingerprint routine that locals were obliged to go through to prove that they had voted and weren't going to vote a second or third or fourth time. So we supervised that. The majority of the rest of the time as I was attached to, I was sent out with the training team, and they would venture out to see what they could find out about the countryside. So we'd board a helicopter. We had air support from a British Merlin, baby Chinook, and we'd troop down to the Saudi border. The Saudi border was porous. That's where the foreign fighters came through into our neck of the woods. But there's a big desert between us and the border. So there's a couple of hours flying to get down there, and we go and check out the border posts, see what's to be heard and told down there, or just sort of wave the flag, show our presence, meet the locals, have a sharia with the elders. And I would also respond to local journalists' requests for interviews. They'd troop up to the front gate and say, can we see the boss? Or there's been reports of you were rocketed last night, what's the truth of this? And I would either brief them off the record or organise for my CO to come out and talk to them. So these people would come and they'd come to the front gate and we'd have a press conference out there, or whenever my half-colonels were out in public and wished to stage an opening of something or other or a project that we're working on, then I'd put them up in front of the cameras and they'd speak to the local media. As I said, we flew around a lot, and you get to see the way they live out in the desert. And you can have been in the air for 20 minutes or so and you can see nothing but, and it's not a sandy desert, it's a stony desert, it's flat and terribly uninteresting. Also saw a lot of history. Just north of the camp is a thing called the ziggurat of a significant construction, very much like the Mayan ziggurats as well, as they called in Mexico and Central America. There's no protection around it from souvenir hunters. People walked up to the top of it, up the steps, and looked off into the distance from out on the top and collected a few bricks and took them home with them. And in other parts of the area that we flew over, there'd be ruined columns still sticking up in parts of the desert. No fence, no warding, no protection, no guards, just there. It's part of the environment. Every significant person that needed an interpreter had one. The commanding officer had one, the training team had one. My interpreter was a young man. He had an established house with his mother and I think some other siblings in the town. He was with us every day at my use and command, and we would share football stories or cultural stories. I told him about Australia and he told me about life in the village. I keep calling it a village, it's much bigger than that. There would have been, I suppose, 10,000 people. It's a highlight of my military career because that's the apex that you aim for. All of your training, all of your practicing is in a benign environment generally, but this is in a contested environment and you are constantly alert for anything that might happen. Indeed, I was frequently beyond the wire with one of the commanding officers, and my task would be public affairs officer for him when required. And if it wasn't required, then I acted as close personal protection by walking around behind him, watching his back. Nothing transpired, but they were soldierly skills, observational skills, alertness and preparedness. This was the culmination of my training, and while a lot of my other military life was extreme fun and sometimes very exhausting, that's what everybody as a soldier trains for, is to go on a deployment. I was attached to two Darwin units, 2 Cav and 5-7 over that period there. Both of those are based in Darwin, and they had homecomings which were celebrated in their hometown. Big parade down the main streets, as they do in Townsville as well. And I had assisted in doing similar homecoming parades in Sydney when I was posted here. But because the majority of my people came from Darwin, I travelled home by myself. I arrived at Sydney Airport. There was nobody to meet me. Not a uniform of any kind. Usually you'll find a movements officer who assists people coming and going by various means. Nothing like that. Carried my bags off, found a cab, drove home. In addition to my solo arrival, I was asked to undergo psychological briefing, and I did so, and it lasted a duration of less than half an hour. It wasn't particularly satisfying and didn't unearth any particular issues that I had. I am now identified as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which gives me certain malfunctions in my life. And that would be common to a lot of soldiers. I had a social evening just last night with a couple of, one former Air Force and one former Navy person, and we formed a bond in one of our last headquarters together, and we still socialise. And during that evening last night, the sailor said to me, "Al, are you all right?" And I was able to assure him that I am. That is really where a lot of the repair work is being done by individuals. It is said to be recognised by Defence, and I'm not sure that they're implementing it as well as they could. Nobody quite understands what occurs to you out there, particularly in Afghanistan, and I have no experience of Afghanistan. I've read enough about it and I've heard enough about it to consider it 200% more horrible than what I was in. There hasn't been a lot of information coming to the Australian public, and I suspect that that's a deliberate strategy by our political masters. We don't want people to know how nasty it can be. They don't see people missing legs, although the Invictus Games is a great help in exposing the injuries that people suffer. I looked at a photograph of an English sapper being awarded a bravery medal. He'd lost both legs, most of his fingers, one eye. He can barely move and barely breathe. He was standing with a walking stick saying, "I will walk to this medal presentation because I will." Ceremonies these days tend to affect me deeply. A couple of times I've been unable to stand for crying. And I'm starting to feel a bit that way now when you ask me a question like that. I think they're wonderful things. I adore the War Memorial in Canberra. This one's mine. It's in my town and it is beautiful. And I've learnt enough about it to see what a beautiful building it is and what a lot of thought and meaning has gone into the embellishments and the additions that are being added to it. I love it.